This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular. Advance your lean journey and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Hey gang, great to see you again. Thanks for coming back to the leanconstructionblog.com podcast with Dick Beyer, and voila, c'est moi. I'm learning a lot of French up here in Canada, so you got to keep up. Today, as I always say, I'm really excited to have two guests, two of the women who claim the title, or at least could easily be bestowed the title of Queens of Lean. The first is Bernita Biekmann, who is the Director of Process at HKS Architects in Dallas. I met Bernita on a project in Stuart, Florida, the Traditions Medical Center. And this was her second IPD project. The first that she had worked on was the iconic Texhoma Project that UHS did in, of all places, Texhoma, which you could probably imagine is on the border of Maine and New York. Yeah, probably not. This was the first project that Bill Seed, after he had read The Commercial Real Estate Revolution by Rex Miller and a series of authors, on a plane back from a visit to one of his sites. This is the place where he decided that he would begin his lean journey and his IPD journey with the team. Bernita at the time was a project architect on that project, and just back off maternity leave from her second daughter, and jumped right into the project. She went on to become the first woman board chair at the Lean Construction Institute, and dates her lean journey from 2008. Like Bernita, another candidate for Queen of Lean is Rebecca Snelling. Rebecca has been a longtime member of the lean community. She started off in 2008 at the California Prison Healthcare Receivership with Lean Project Consulting. She worked with Greg Howell and others at Lean Project Consulting for another 4.5 years, and then joined J.E. Dunn, Director of Lean and Lean Construction. She joined the Denver office and has now moved on to supervise a team of almost 10 different people around the country for J.E. Dunn. She was the second woman to be LCI Board Chair, and she was the one that took LCI through the COVID crises that we've all been through. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's podcast with Bernita Biekmann and Rebecca Snelling. Let's jump into the background a little bit. So, Rebecca, you were managing operations for a pool company. How did you even get into construction? Because you didn't start in construction, right? You were like an artist or something, right?
I started as a scheduler in a pool company, and there's like 12 steps to construction in swimming pools. So a scheduler really doesn't do anything other than organize the trades and call the customers. But as I continued to advance in that organization and wound up in management. So, and I know a pool company sounds like nothing, right? It's all residential pools too.
It sounds really good right now, I'll tell you that.
We were doing $200 million worth of work a year. Wow. And just out of the office that I was in, we were building 1,500 swimming pools in people's backyards out of one office every year. So it was a bigger business than I ever knew there was. But during that time, we had hired a lean consultant to come work with us. Our CEO had read something. So he said, we're going to do this. And I had the pleasure of being on the honor, really, of being on our internal lean team for a year in 2006, where they partnered up 4 of us with 2 consultants. And the consultants coached us to coach our internal operators on lean. So it wasn't anything about last planner system. It was all about lean leadership, lean management, value stream mapping, and those kind of things. After a year, I went back into an operations role. And at some point shortly after that, me and a friend who was in the lean group that year got together and we created a reorganization plan to reorg our office in a way that was much better for our customers, so they would have the same contact from sales through warranty, and kind of make it a one-piece flow for them. And we presented it to the CEO and to my boss, and they all said, go for it. And Rebecca, you're in charge, and Kevin, you're her right-hand man, and you guys figure it out. By the way, it's supposed to take 3 years, do it in 1. And you want training resources, you'll have to train while you're managing. And we were just young and dumb enough to think we could pull it off. And then I wound up going and working for Lean Project Consulting. And day 1 on the job, I flew out to California and landed on the CPR project and met Greg Howell and got to learn and work with Greg and Hal Maycomber for 4.5 years. But really my role wasn't focused on design or construction. It was focused on people. And it has continued to be that way.
Well, that's cool. So Bernita, your boss probably didn't come to you and said, hey, I read an article about making more money, and I'm tapping you, little lady, to be our lean champion.
No, it wasn't like that. So when I first learned about lean, I was a project architect. And if you don't know what project architects do, project architects are the ones that are the doers. We coordinate the work, we put the drawing packages together, we put the specification packages together. And at that time, we did all our work hard bid. So I loved being a project architect. I love figuring it out. I love being a problem solver. But at the point of projects going out to bid, you're under the fire. So if there's any person that understood or saw the waste in the design process, it's pretty much an optimal viewpoint from my perspective. The conversation, it wasn't my boss telling me, it was client found lean, right? Going to conferences. I come back and 2 days after it was, you need to go. We're gonna train the entire team on lean. And I got, no one else has time for this. You go sit in this training. That was really the gist of it. And since I was the PA, I was buried into it. We weren't in design anymore. We were in kind of DDs. We had started CDs. We had just issued a structural package. That was a huge mess, right? Because we issued it too early. So all the different things, the entire team went through lean training and really started to learn about a lot of the issues that were in the industry. So the aha moments were really when I had to negotiate with the contractors on packages. We were trying to take a bunch of time out of the schedule. We were trying to take a bunch of cost out of the schedule, and we had to do it in ways that we had never had to do it before. And that's by talking to each other.
What a concept.
I know. It was the first time I had ever been, not the first time at all that I was allowed to talk to some of the trade contractors. I mean, usually you come on site and they're asked to leave the room. But we worked out problems together. I mean, they would wait for me to get there. I mean, luckily that project was, 60 minutes from my house. So I could drive out there, and normally they wouldn't talk to me. This job, if they found an issue, we would just walk out together and solve it. And that was the most fun because it was less red tape. It was less drawings and red tape and RFIs and all that junk that everyone hates to do. And it was more trying to figure out the work and doing problem solving. So
was that Texhoma?
That was Texhoma.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of the
legendary. Yes. And it was 2008 too.
Wow.
So we were waiting for everything. It was the beginning of the Great Recession. So we were watching, and everyone was trying to figure out what their advantage was going to be. And this was the, great thing about health projects is they're usually completely funded earlier. So we learned a lot, and that was a great team, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's funny that it was 2008 because that's when Dan and I started at CPR, and Rebecca, I'm assuming 2008 was about the time you showed up there as well, because we were hot in the middle of the co-opetition or whatever we were doing out there. And, lots of people date their lean pedigrees to 2008. So I'm glad I've got a couple thoroughbreds here with me, which is fantastic. So early days in the lean community, you were a consultant, Rebecca, and Bernita, you were leading your squad. You kind of fell into that. I think we met at Traditions in Stewart, Florida, sail fishing capital of the world.
Interesting enough, on the lean front, I mentioned I was a project architect. I never went to project interviews. I wasn't the person that got invited to speak at conferences or even go to conferences. And I went overnight after I learned lean to being requested to be at 2 interviews on the same day. One of them was Tradition and another was an IPD project in Indiana. So I went to one of the Tradition interviews and I went to one of the Riley interviews. We ended up getting both projects, and it was really just because we had that experience and could speak the language of those projects and be able to actually go after it in a time, right? 2008, 2009, 2010, when there wasn't a lot of projects at all out there, let alone big projects like that.
But I remember we did a series of swing sets and a Jello slide at some park thing to try to get these guys on board with how collaborative we were. I think Concher was really the guy that was.
We made cookies or something. Did we make cookies? I don't know.
Yeah,
we built like a playground in our interview or something.
Yeah, and we were hanging the boards from it. And we were doing collaborative.
Yeah.
Sessions, and it was a half a day interview, I think. So when you were lean project consulting, Rebecca, did you have to go chase projects?
There were occasionally clients would try to get us, not clients, general contractors or architects would try to get us to be part of their pursuit team or to teach them enough lean language that they could go BS their way through it. But we didn't take those on. One of the things Bernita said about, being in the thick of it and understanding all the waste and the opportunities for it. One of the things that I think is kind of unique when I came into in 2008 and met you all out at, CPR and whatever, to me, the traditional methodology, I never understood that. So this whole everything on, collaboration on steroids and learning side by side with Greg Howell and, Glenn Ballard would come in for his guest visits, and Will Lichtig taking me to dinner and talking about, what do you think here? And I had no idea like the amazingness that I was surrounded by. And I sucked it all up and learned it all, but then like learning how broken the rest of the industry is, I was like, oh, this is a big deal. Like that, it's not the way it should be, but it's just been really, it's fascinating coming in from that perspective.
Yeah, it's funny because, I was a trial lawyer, and so I had big cases involving these big disputes. I always wondered why there was never like a plaintiff and a defendant. There was a plaintiff and 140 defendants, right? You segued over to the construction side with J.E. Dunn. You've been successful there. I think both of you are vice presidents or principals or mucky mucks in your organization. So I love that kind of mucky muck story. I was always a mucky muck because I was the only guy in my organization. And I just made myself that guy. But tell us a little bit about your segue into construction.
So I like that term mucky muck, and I think I will update my business card with that. I do like it. So I had consulted on a number of projects for J.E. Dunn. The first one being an IPD with a client that Bernita used to do a lot of work for too, probably still does, I'm guessing. So I had consulted on that team, and we brought the project in. It was just a small project, but it was supposed to be 6 months. We got it done 4.5. The team never thought they'd get it done in 6 to begin with. So they were amazed. And then we started doing last planner system on a number of projects, and they started to recognize like, oh, this is really beneficial. At the same time, I think Dick, actually someone from your old firm was working with one of our other teams in another part of the country. And they had seen great success too. And then the J. Dunn corporate started to recognize that they're getting a little bit behind the 8 ball on this thing called lean. And so they hired me and brought me in. It has been so that was 2012. It has been a very long road. We've done a lot of, put in a lot of hard work, and we've made some great progress. it's hard to remember that sometimes when you get in the middle of all the craziness going on every day. But I just remember at the very beginning, when the company hired me, I really genuinely think they thought my job was to put sticky notes in every job trailer, and then we would be lean, and that was it.
It was about a 6-month assignment.
Right. But I didn't know that's what they thought.
Right.
I thought, well, of course, lean, they know what I know about lean. So it's been a really fun journey, actually, kind of helping the organization, helping guide the organization, looking for the opportunities of what are the next things to implement, partnering with HR and building some things into how we develop our people. And I mean, just all kinds of great, fun things along the way.
One of the things I love about both of your stories is that, you know, both of you have come into organizations that are dominated by either the cowboy kind of in the construction era or the beret and the cloak in architecture. Bernita, you succeeded in being right that collaborative center point. I still remember your team building event at the Riley Children's Hospital, which was a really moving project. It's kind of cool to work on projects that move you. But when you took the girls out for skeet shooting or something, there's a bunch of women with guns, and I was going, "Oh my God, this can't."
Well, and that was actually the contractor that set up that brought us all out, and the women formed our own group. Oftentimes, the last few projects I've worked on, when you transition from a role of being a person, like whether it's a project architect, project manager on a project, to actually being really the lean facilitator or the lean person from your organization, you still end up being an outsider to your own organization. And a lot of times you have to correct or adjust or have really hard conversations with your own people, because the project hired you to be the person that helps people collaborate. And sometimes you're your own worst enemy. You know, you have to have conversations with your people, like you need to show up, you need to participate in this. Whether I'm talking to my own side or talking to the contractor side, because they don't think you're listening to you. Or on the Akron project, which I got to work with Bolt, we had a 3-person team. It was myself and Will and Nick, who had our own therapy sessions to really figure out how we were going to give therapy to our own teams.
I've hosted some of those therapy sessions. I usually have to take a cab home.
Well, sometimes that helps.
Yeah, because they are deep dives. But you've both been really successful, especially in the lean community. I mean, if somebody was going to name the queen of lean, it would have to be a 2-person post, because I think you both have borne that mantle. But I want to talk about your work at LCI, because I think people are really interested in what's happened. I'm certainly interested in what happened since I've gone. And Bernita, you were the first woman chair. It really seems kind of like almost wrong to say, well, you know, you were the first woman. But I'm doing these podcasts. These are first. So I needed an angle. So I like that. Tell me a little bit about how you got so involved. I remember our first Congress.
Yeah, I did attend, I think it was 2009, actually, that I attended my first Congress. And probably the first time, and you know, Congress was much different then, right? It's
yes.
10 presentations each day, maybe. There was no more than 10 women at the entire thing. I remember that. That first Congress I went to, there was a point in time where they brought up okay, these are all our communities of practice that we're planning around the country. And Dallas-Fort Worth was one of them. So I found the guy in the audience who was supposed to be starting that group and had a conversation with him. And another person that I was with had the same. And I ended up being on that core group that started the community of practice in Dallas. And we had so much interest, and maybe, you know, the timing was good because it was 2009 going into 2010 when it really hit bottom. And people were looking for their, you know, whether they were looking for it from a BD perspective, or they were looking truly to learn, or they were looking for their, you know, angle that they could win the next project. We didn't care. We were going to take them. And we had huge attendance numbers. Now, we also offered free beer. That always helps. We had free beer and snacks to anyone that would show up.
Well, and you had Bubba Warnick as a regular.
Yes, you did. But that was a great starting point for me to really get involved in LCI. I was getting involved in it at a local level. So I could tell my story. I could pull in people from the local audience to tell their story. And I spoke at other starting, because there were so many communities of practice that were started about that time.
Right.
And my first speaking engagements were actually speaking at a lot of those other communities of practice around the country, because there weren't also a lot of people who were telling the design story. Because a lot of the design story, a lot of designers didn't want to admit that we were part of these projects, or we'll do it our way, but we'll play along maybe. But there weren't a lot of people telling the design story, and I was happy to go.
First design story in LCI was, why isn't it the Lean Design and Construction Institute? So your first go around with LCI, I would assume, Rebecca, would be because you were working with Greg, and this was Greg's baby, and there was a lot of he had been able to generate a lot of interest.
So it definitely started with Greg, and 2008 was my first Congress, and kind of, again, opposite Bernita. I lived in outside of Philadelphia at the time. There was no COP starting up there. Plus, I traveled all the time for work. So Congress was a way for me to get a quick hit of like all the crazy cool things going on around the world at that time, because there were people coming in from England to speak at that too, I think. But then I also did a lot of the trainings at Congress the day before. Greg taught me how to do his version of the intro to Lean, and did that in CBA training and a number of different trainings going through from the Boulderado to the other Boulder hotel that I forget what's called. But so that was really more of my entry into it. And then somewhere, I think by the time, maybe it was 2010, 11, they started an education committee, and I joined the education committee, and then the chair wound up leaving the committee. She went and went off on maternity leave, so I took over. Then I ran I was the chair of the education committee for a couple of years. So I was just heavily involved. And one of the things that I learned from Greg was the spirit of giving back. I think that's one of my big goals with everything I do around Lean, even when it's within J Dunn, is really in the interest of a better industry. It's not about a better J Dunn. That'll be great, but it's really about a better industry. And that has continued to drive me to stay so involved with the education committee and those kind of things until they wound up hiring an education director.
Those of us on this podcast have had some effect on changing the way we build buildings in the world, which is really a built environment that I think we all, can be very proud of. And so let's fast forward to Bernita. Somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, do you want to be the vice chair of LCI?" I don't know if you realized that then you would have to be the chair the next year. It strikes me that you might have gone, "Oh, vice chair, yeah, that's probably cool." And then boom, all of a sudden you were the chair. How did that happen?
Kind of like that, actually. We had a little bit of a legacy as HKS of having, people on the board. And as I went through the ranks of HKS, they wanted to have more executive type leadership. As I started to gain that kind of executive type leadership, I was asked to be on the board, and, I accepted that position. Yeah, it was a little bit of a tap on the shoulder, say, "Are you ready to be vice chair? And oh, by the way, you're going to be chair the next year."
What was your vision? Where did you see that LCI could use improvement or needed to extend something it was doing? What was your goal?
I think a lot of my focus initially was just to change the perception that this is just about construction, and to change it by getting more participation from a design focus, or from a design perspective. So the way I looked at it, and I know you're saying this is the first in terms of first women who led the board. I was also the first architect that led that board. So
yeah,
that was really something
that was probably that was the mistake in the whole thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So really, it was how do we gain presence and exposure in the architecture community, and we did that by things like we had a separate committee proposed that we selected people that were either associated with AIA, the other architects on the board that we met separately to say, how do we strengthen design forum? What is something, or how can we strengthen the participation in Congress? How do we make sure that there's tracks that designers, whether they're engineers, interior designers, architects, designers in general, will be interested in attending? And this year, actually, we're having the first annual design award that was announced at the Design Forum and will be announced at Congress. So how do we really elevate, lean construction is not just about cheaper buildings, right? It's really about added value, and that value isn't just in performance, which is great too, but it's also design performance as well. So lean is really, from my perspective, the projects that I've been involved with that incorporated lean we can talk about the saving time and saving money, and that's great. And I know that our clients love to hear it, but they're also better performing projects. They're better community projects. They're better goal reaching projects. They hit all the marks on all those other things that the team cares about. Because if it didn't do those other things, that saving money and saving time, it's great, but it's not what keeps you motivated, and it's not what keeps us coming back for more. It's really the elevated quality, and it's really the elevated relationships that we build, and it's the elevated performance of those buildings.
It didn't take me long to understand that what we're really talking about is the value proposition. Mm-hmm. That it's not about that. If you concentrate on value, waste begins to eliminate itself, right? It just falls away because it's not valuable, right? It's just not one of those valuable things. And I think your work has been really instrumental in getting people to understand that this is not about sacrificing design so you get a cheap building, right? Because that's kind of what happens sometimes when people start thinking about that. But this is the promise that we can deliver better buildings for the least possible amount of money and time. Not that it's not going to cost us money and time, but what is the sweet spot so that we can get the best value for the least amount of money? So it's really not about the money or the schedule. It's really about the best value and minimizing those things. So as you followed Bernita into the chair, I think were you a year away, Rebecca? Separated by a year or two?
So I joined the board the year Bernita was the chair.
Oh, okay.
And then the following year, I was the vice chair. Very similar tap on the shoulder, like literally. Yeah, and I love the way you just articulated that, Dick, about the value. And I think when you're in the lean design and construction industry, you get it, that it's not about the money and it's not about the schedule. But when you're not in it, it's really hard to feel that, to feel what that means. So I was the vice chair in 2020, which was, as we all know, a wonderfully fun year. I was learning how to be a vice chair, but at the same time, LCI, I don't know if people recognize this or not, but it's a nonprofit organization, and a big chunk of the money that comes in for them is through the in-person conference that is held in every October. And 2020, it became apparent pretty quickly that we weren't going to be able to do that. So it was like, whoa, let's hold on tight and figure out how to make sure we don't sink. I mean, but how can we make sure we stay in, first of all, financially solvent? Maybe that's second of all. First of all, still engaged with our communities. How can we engage with them even more now that it's a totally different model? So it was kind of a lot of reactionary mode. And I would say through 2020, we learned a lot of good lessons. We did some interesting things. And now going into 2021, we've really challenged the board to come up with some really good, solid 2 to 5 year goals that we can then nest all of our work under. And that's what we're working on right now. And one of the interesting pieces of data that came out of some rudimentary research, it's not academic research, but member companies represent 29% of the non-residential construction market. But you don't look at our commercial market and say 29% of our projects are lean projects. So we've recognized that there's opportunity outside of our member companies, but there's also a lot of opportunity within our member companies. And so we're really trying to figure out now, how can we reach in both deep and wide and continue to really snowball that momentum with lean, because it is, like Bernita just explained, it's better. It's just better.
Well, and I think I've known in my kind of consulting career when I was kind of that office by office, Turner was completely different in Chicago than it was in New York, and it was completely different in Anaheim. And because construction happens to be more local, I don't think architecture is as local as construction seems to be, because it seems that it's more transportable.
I think it just depends on, I think how we described our offices, like we try to maintain one culture, but every office has a slightly different personality. So that personality brings about, and it pulls things from the culture where it is, and it reacts to that. So there are differences between HKS offices and their approach and how they look at lean too, mostly influenced by how many projects that they've had in their own office.
Right. Yeah, I think on the construction side, it's really influenced by the nature of the trades in the community. So Rebecca, you concentrated on trying to stabilize the organization in the year of COVID, but it sounds like you've actually tried to expand it further and look at what those things are that we can do for that 29%. And so not just grow it to 35%, but grow the number of projects inside that 29% from 15% to 50%.
Yeah. I would say we're still nailing down exactly what those percentages are that we're trying to achieve, and what exactly it looks like. But we've started experimenting with some new things. We've got a new event coming up this summer. It's just a quick hitter, like 6-hour, focused on respect for people. And it's an interactive workshop with 250 of your closest friends. We're experimenting with new things like that. We are, experimenting with some new types of communities of practice, bringing people together that might not be based on a geography, might be based on roles or position or a company type, trying to pick up the momentum, and really drive things to move the needle a little further in the industry. I mean, it's continued to move, and it's continued to move at a pace, and we want to figure out how to speed that pace up.
So what's next for you at LCI, and what's next for you kind of career-wise? Where do you see all this stuff?
You're talking to Bernita, right?
Well, I'm talking to you first, and then I'll ask Bernita, because
I mean, I think with LCI, I think the future is looking deeper and wider, right? And really figuring out how to get that momentum going. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you hear it all the time when you talk to someone who's on a lean project that's going well and they're really hitting on all cylinders. I never want to work any different ever again, right? Whether it's an IPD or even if it's just the construction team and just the trades and the GC. But getting people to that point, figuring out how to make that easier is something that will get done somehow in the next 10 years. To answer that question. How
about you, Bernita? What's your continued role with LCI? How about inside your firm? How about president of the AIA or intergalactic architecture?
Something, yeah, all of those things. I mean, certain interest, or certainly interest in continuing the role in the design forum, the design community, and strengthening that, because that's going to continue to be something that we need to work on and engage with. Internally in my office, my role is transitioned to a firm-wide role. So I'm the chief process officer. So I focus completely on process improvement throughout the organization.
Is that chief process officer?
It is if you're in Canada. We do not have Canadian offices. So
not yet.
Not yet. But yeah, so I work on process improvement. That's my job now. So whether we're talking about improvement on a project, on a design project, or right now it's really involved in technology systems too. But this is my full-time job now.
So what's the role of the architect if it's not, and maybe it is the beret and the cloak and all that stuff? What's the role of the architect in a lean world?
Well, I mean, there's still a need for maybe not a cloak and maybe just the beret. I mean, the beret is always a good idea, right?
I think I actually gave you a beret one time with a sticky staple on it.
I still have it, I believe.
That's awesome.
I mean, there's still design inspiration has to come from somewhere, right? someone needs to come up with the idea that starts it all, as well as someone needs to put all those ideas together. I mean, and designers are trained problem solvers, and they're trained to take all the problems that exist, whether we're talking about community issues, environmental issues, code issues, civil rights issues in terms of how it relates to the built environment. I mean, our role is really to taking all the issues that exist in the world and translating those into the built environment in an aesthetically pleasing way. And at the same time, make sure that it can be built, and we're working together with contractors and trade contractors to actually make that happen. So it will continue, but I think our role needs to continue to be more focused on what we can do to actually affect and influence the community and the world around us, more than just influence ourselves and what we think is good.
Yeah, I was on a panel at the Design Forum this year, so thank you for remembering the old guy, getting him in there once in a while. But my focus was really on redefining who our customers are, and really making it the planet, the community, the aesthetic appeal of where we live, and the values that are more than just driving up a building someplace and then moving on to the next one. So I really appreciate what you're saying, is that as we move there, and I've also found that I think I'm starting to think that we mix up collaboration with cooperation and camaraderie and things, and that it's really hard to collaborate with 300 people in a room, especially when you have people that know a lot about it and people that think, wow, this would be so much fun just to participate in this. And I think that collaborative design, collaborative construction, that those things really continue to be around specialists that can collaborate to solve particular problems. And that what we're really looking for is more that IPD is not a collaborative model, it's a relational model. So we're looking at focusing on the relationships that people have and including them as comrades and colleagues, and respecting them as people, but not necessarily offloading every decision as a collaborative decision for the entire team.
It just, you got to switch your perspective, right? You're making a decision on the behalf of your own interest. You're making a decision on the behalf of the best interests of the stakeholders.
Right.
And you're part of those stakeholders too. And I think just flipping that focus is what allows people to only wear the beret and not the cape, right? You don't have to burn the building down because people didn't agree with you, or they didn't like your idea. But you either have to be willing to convince them for all the right reasons, or adjust your end ideas to actually coincide with those stakeholders' reasons for that thing existing.
Dick, when you were walking through that, I'm picturing some of these big mega projects where people insist that there's 40 people in every single meeting, right? I'm totally with you. I think one of the things that oftentimes is missing is intentionality, right? What problem are we coming together to solve? Now let's be intentional about bringing the right people along to solve that. And if Dick has a good background in this, we invite him. If he's just gonna watch and listen and whatever from the corner, let's not invite him, and let's share back with him. And I think there's so many things that if we were just a little more intentional, it can help us focus on the value a lot better. Also, to your point, a pretty big IPD project that almost fell completely off the rails because all they focused on was liking each other and camaraderie, and they had all kinds of team building events. And what ultimately wound up happening, they forgot, like, oh, we have a project we have to deliver. Like, oh yeah, there was
team building, but there was no building.
Right.
And that's actually what we're supposed to be doing, right?
and again, it comes back to intentionality. Like, all that team building is fantastic, but you can't do that and then just drop the ball on delivering the project. You have to have a skill set of how to design and how to build a project.
I mean, one of the things I've learned, I think you have to be really careful of like lean speakers, right? Because they'll say, well, aren't we supposed to be collaborating? Aren't we supposed to be doing this? And you go, no. We're not supposed to be doing that. We're supposed to be actually, this is really hard. This is not about, when people talk about kumbaya, but it's not about kumbaya. It's really hard work. It's really, it's something that gets people out of their comfort zone. The transition between means and methods and design is a line that we blur in IPD all the time, because we believe that the architect actually was thinking about a way of putting this thing together when they were designing it. So it'd be good to tap that information.
I think another misconception too is that these projects aren't necessarily easier, right? You don't do a lean project because it's easier. It would be easier for me just to shut my door and design it without any input from anyone to do what I want. And here you go. But that doesn't create a better solution. Lean projects are hard. Collaboration's hard, but it's better. The result's better, the outcome's better, and you usually, ultimately, it ends up being a good experience.
Yeah, and one of the things that we forget about it, when people talk about big data and all the things that we can do with all of this data, but it's got to be the right data. I'm surprised by the number of general contractors that don't, at the end of a project, go back to look at their estimate and see how close they were. That's what I'm looking for. Rebecca, are you undertaking that at JE Dunn?
So with some of the things you mentioned, yes.
Living that with the process officer thing, I'm sure.
So with them, like with our estimates and things like that, we actually do put that back into our estimating software to help us improve our system. So that is something we absolutely do. When it comes to software for things like Last Planner system, it's really fascinating. Some of our teams who are a little new to JDUN maybe, or new to our approach to Last Planner system, will maybe come in and say, hey, I want to try such and such, or I use this software at my last company, and we say, let's first get your team up to standard based on the expectations that we have around the kinds of conversations you'll have, and then we will help you implement that software. What it takes from my side and my group side is then follow up to make sure they're still continuing to have the right conversations. What we are seeing happen, I would say probably about 50% of the time, a team will actually go and try the software, and then they say, I'm going to go back to using it the old way, going the old way. So we lose the data. We have, obviously, over COVID, we've shifted a lot to things like Mural or Miro, which is essentially replicating the sticky notes. So we do that a lot more consistently now, even that we're coming out of the COVID era, but it doesn't have the data that you're talking about, which I think is really valuable. But I think there's other ways I think all of it is somewhat valuable, but I think there are parts of it that are probably more valuable than others. So we're still focusing on getting our teams to understand how to have the right conversations.
Yeah.
Because that's really the crux of it.
I think that's the difference between knowledge and junk, right?
Right.
Some of the data is valuable and you have to be able to parse it, but you need to have time to parse it, right? Or you need to have a process for that.
And if you have a bunch of teams using software on a system that's based on conversations, and only half of those teams have those conversations, all of the data doesn't matter because it all blends together.
Right. And you have to be able to have conversations where people can actually talk to each other rather than,
telling,
this is when we're going to get this done, right?
Right. Exactly.
So one kind of last question, Bernita, I'm really interested in that, especially since Rebecca raised this about the Last Planner. So do you use the Last Planner in design? How do you facilitate the Last Planner in design? Have you come up with a good process for facilitating Last Planner or some kind of process in design that measures milestones or deliverables or whatever?
Yeah, I think the most successful projects focus on the design handoffs of information and decisions, and that's what they record and they do milestones for. So I think the best projects actually use they focus on handoffs of information and decision in the broader collaborative environment, and they don't go deeper than that, because the tendency for designers is to either put too much information or not enough, right? They want to plan every task, and then they get frustrated because they're like, I can't tell you how long it's going to take me to design. I'm like, I don't care how long it takes you to do that. I just want you to know that on September 2nd, you need to give shaft openings to the mechanical engineer. That's what you need to do. I don't care how you get there. That's just when you need to do it. So it's handoffs of information, and it's having an understanding of what information a client needs to make a decision and when that decision is going to be made, right? They focus on that, they're good. I've had teams do more detailed internal. So in the office, we're going to get our team together and we're going to plan out specific steps, what we're going to do on what days and how we're going to deliver that, who's going to work on what. And they do a little bit more of a comprehensive. I have a client now where we look at, it's long-term clients where we have a master plan that we may be doing 10 to 15 small projects at the same time. And we will look at that overall schedule and then we'll divide it up, and it's facilitated per projects. And we just facilitate it in terms of milestones. It's like milestone of designing the floor or getting to a pricing package. I think it's really all in how you look at it. But the most important things from the collaboration standpoint are handoffs and decisions internally, whatever it is that gets you to the point where you can get the job done.
Yeah, I've always looked at it as that you pick your deliverables, whatever they are, and then you say, what information do you need? So that you can go off and put on the beret and the cape if you need to. But what's the information that you need to have available to you to be able to thoughtfully go through that process?
Yeah, because the weird thing is, and this has been documented ever since the early days when they were writing papers about last planner, is that it's a different conversation when you're creating something from nothing rather than you're creating something from a set of instructions.
Right.
When you know what's there and you know the total scope, the scope can change throughout the design, and you don't know what's going to happen. Your focus could change, the parameters could change, people could change.
Glenn actually wrote a paper about that where he talked about how variability and variance is actually really important in design, and it's not waste, but it's when do you do it? And the variability in the delivery program is what causes you problems. It's not the variability in design. So one last thing for you too, Rebecca, that you facilitate when you're on IPD projects. I'm assuming that you come in as the kind of team facilitator in some role. Generally, how do you interface with the designers? Does it hurt you that you come from a construction company, or is there a hurdle to overcome there?
So I actually am a little bit further removed. I'm not with teams nearly as often as I used to be. I have a team of 9 folks around the country who do that. I would say sometimes our designers are reaching out to us and saying, yes, please help me. I'd love to do this. I don't know how to do this. We actually got hired for a job recently in the state of Alabama where, because of how their laws are, you cannot, if you're in the pre-construction, you cannot go after the work because it's a public job. So, but they brought us in just for pre-construction and for us to lead the design phase of the project. So we're doing all of those things, and that designer and the owner are very interested. They're coming along great. But if there are oftentimes where, yes, my hat, it says J Dunn. People treat me like I'm a contractor, and I guess theoretically, maybe by paycheck I am. But I have as much experience prior to J Dunn with design teams as I do with contractors. So it's, my mind, I'm more in the people business. I'm not even necessarily construction, right? So it does get in the way. But when we have a team that's willing to let me or someone from my team help them, then we do.
That's fantastic.
In fact, I wrote down one of the things Bernita said so I can update our last planner and design training that we use internally.
But this has been a lot of fun. It's been great to catch up with you gals. Thank you so much for doing this. We had, I'm sure we have content for another like 5 hours, but I'll get you back on. But I wanted you here as the first, and it's clear why you were easily the first. Of course, we don't have the other 30 people back there to look at, but thank you so much for taking the time and joining in the podcast. It's been fun.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.